When I first moved into Oak Ridge Estates, I understood the appeal. Pristine lawns stretched before colonial-style homes. Children played safely in cul-de-sacs while neighbors chatted over perfectly trimmed hedges. The kind of neighborhood where people aspired to live, if they could afford the homes and tolerate the rules. I had received the HOA handbook before finalizing my purchase. 172 pages of regulations covering everything from acceptable mailbox designs to the precise shade of beige permitted for exterior window trim. I read it thoroughly, noting the restrictions but also the boundaries of their authority. 2 weeks after settling in, I purchased the trailer. It was not much to look at: weathered aluminum siding, windows with condensation trapped between the panes, tires that had not rolled in years. But it served a purpose few would understand. I had it delivered under cover of early morning fog and positioned it on the far northeastern corner of my property, behind a natural screen of pine trees, just inside my legal boundary line. The reaction was swift and predictable. First came the sideways glances when I collected my mail. Then the neighbors walking their dogs suddenly found reason to pause near my driveway. I would wave politely, they would nod stiffly. The whispers had begun. 3 days later, the first letter arrived, printed on formal HOA letterhead with the pretentious gold embossing they used to signify importance. "Notice of aesthetic violation," it declared in bold type. The letter cited Section 47, Paragraph C. "No temporary structures, mobile homes, trailers, or vehicles not in regular use shall be visible from any community roadway or neighboring property." It demanded removal within 14 days. I filed the letter away without response. The second notice arrived 10 days later, this time with the threat of daily fines. I filed this one as well. My property boundaries were clearly marked. The trailer sat 80 feet from the nearest property line, and most importantly, it was there for a reason far beyond HOA jurisdiction. At night, I would quietly visit the trailer, entering through a rear door invisible from the street. Inside was not the abandoned wreck they imagined. Equipment hummed softly: radio scanners, monitors, recording devices. I would check each system methodically, download data to encrypted drives, and leave as discreetly as I had arrived. On day 15, I noticed the first unmarked vehicle, a dark sedan with government plates, parked just at the entrance to our subdivision. To the average resident, it might have seemed like a visitor or a lost driver consulting navigation. To me, it was confirmation that the operation was fully active. Corinne Whitfield introduced herself on a Saturday morning as I washed my car in the driveway. She did not extend her hand. Instead, she extended a new HOA violation notice, this one personally signed. "I do not believe you have received our communications," she said, her voice carrying the artificial sweetness of practiced condescension. "The community has standards, Mr. Mitchell. That trailer is becoming a significant concern." "Thank you for your interest in my property," I replied calmly, continuing to rinse soap from my vehicle. "I have received your letters." Her smile tightened. "Then you understand it needs to be removed immediately. We have already been generous with extensions." I stood straight, matching her gaze. "The trailer is within my property line and violates no county ordinances." "The Homeowners Association has additional standards," she countered, her voice rising slightly. "Standards you agreed to when purchasing your home." "I have read the covenant thoroughly," I replied. "You might want to review Section 12 regarding structures not visible from community roadways." Her eyes narrowed. I had clearly not performed the role she expected: immediate compliance, perhaps an apology for my transgression against neighborhood perfection. Instead, she was met with quiet, informed resistance. "This is not over," she stated flatly. "The board considers you in violation, and we will be taking appropriate measures." As she walked away, I noticed another unmarked vehicle slowly cruising past my house. The watchers were increasing. The operation was heating up, and I had just made myself the perfect distraction. Corinne Whitfield was not accustomed to being ignored. As president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association for 6 consecutive years, she had cultivated an aura of suburban authority that few dared challenge. Her campaign against my trailer quickly became personal, a crusade she discussed at supermarkets, school functions, and even church gatherings. "He is bringing down property values with that eyesore," she would declare to anyone who would listen. "We cannot allow one resident to destroy what we have all built here." Her lieutenant in this battle was Richard Thompson, HOA treasurer and retired insurance adjuster who fancied himself a legal expert. Together, they recruited other board members, forming what they called the Covenant Enforcement Committee, 5 residents who would drive by my home daily, documenting the continuing existence of my trailer with timestamp photos. The HOA newsletter that month featured a front-page article titled, "Maintaining Community Standards. Your property values depend on it." While my name was never mentioned, the accompanying photograph showed a strategically angled shot of my property line with the edge of the trailer visible through the trees. Their tactics shifted from bureaucratic to invasive precisely 47 days after my arrival. My surveillance equipment captured Karen at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, stepping deliberately across my property marker, phone in hand. She moved through the tree line, approaching the trailer from the rear, photographing it from multiple angles. I watched the footage that evening, noting how she tested the door handle and peered through windows covered with what appeared to be dust, but was actually a specialized film that prevented outside viewing while maintaining visibility from within. She spent 17 minutes trespassing before departing with what she clearly believed was damning evidence. The confrontation came 3 days later as I retrieved my garbage bins from the curb. Karen approached with Richard in tow, digital tablet in hand. "We have documented the condition of your trailer," she announced without greeting. "The board has authorized me to inform you that daily fines of $150 will commence next Monday unless the structure is removed." I kept my expression neutral. "You obtained these photos by trespassing on private property. I have video documentation of your unauthorized entry." Her confidence faltered momentarily before Richard stepped forward. "The HOA Covenant grants board members reasonable access to inspect violations." "For visible violations from community spaces," I corrected. "Not to cross clearly marked property boundaries without permission or notice. That is trespassing under state law." Karen's face flushed with anger. "We are trying to protect this community. That trailer is a disgrace, abandoned, unused, collecting vermin and possibly harboring vagrants." "The trailer is neither abandoned nor unused," I stated firmly. "And you have no authority to determine its purpose or condition without proper inspection requests submitted in writing, as outlined in your own bylaws, Section 24, Paragraph F." Richard blinked in surprise. Few residents actually read the massive HOA rulebook, much less cited it accurately during confrontations. "This is not over," Karen hissed, the same phrase she had used before, but now laced with genuine hostility. "If you want to play legal games, we can escalate this beyond the HOA. The county has ordinances, too." As they walked away, I noticed Karen typing furiously on her phone. The escalation had begun. The visit I had been expecting came the following evening. A black Suburban with government plates parked 2 houses down. A man in a navy suit approached on foot, casual but alert. Agent Davidson had been my contact since the beginning. "The setup functioning properly?" he asked quietly as we stood in my garage, appearing to any watchful neighbors as a friendly conversation. "Everything is operational," I confirmed. "But we have a complication. The HOA president is escalating her campaign against the trailer. She has already trespassed once to gather evidence." Davidson frowned. "That could become problematic. Has she seen anything?" "Nothing compromising yet. The windows are treated, doors secured, but she is persistent and now threatening county involvement." "Keep maintaining normal patterns," he instructed. "The operation is approaching a critical phase. We cannot relocate the surveillance post now." As he departed, I noticed Karen watching from her living room window across the street, phone pressed to her ear. She had taken my resistance as a declaration of war, and in her world, she was accustomed to winning such conflicts. The county inspector arrived 3 days later, clipboard in hand, clearly uncomfortable with his assignment. Karen stood triumphantly at the curb as he approached my door. "Just doing a routine check on a reported zoning issue," he explained apologetically. I invited him to inspect the property line and the trailer's placement. He verified my survey markers and noted the trailer's position well within my boundaries. When he departed 30 minutes later, Karen's expression had transformed from smugness to outrage. Her trump card had failed. That night, I watched through the surveillance system as she stood at the edge of my property, staring toward the trailer with unconcealed hatred. The simplest explanation, that a new neighbor might actually know his rights, seemed unfathomable to her. There had to be more, and her determination to discover it was growing dangerously strong. The morning after the county inspector's visit, I found a notice taped to my front door. Printed on official HOA letterhead, it announced the commencement of daily fines for continued aesthetic violations under Article 7. Beginning immediately, my account would be charged $150 per day until the trailer was removed. I photographed the notice, added it to my growing documentation file, and proceeded with my day. That afternoon, I paid my regular HOA dues online, the exact amount stipulated in the covenant, not a penny more. The fines would remain unpaid, creating a paper trail of their overreach. 6 days later, while returning from grocery shopping, I turned onto my street to discover a commercial tow truck backed up to my property line. 3 men in landscaping uniforms were cutting through the undergrowth toward my trailer. Karen stood supervising from the sidewalk, arms crossed in satisfaction. I pulled into my driveway and approached quickly but calmly, phone already recording. "Excuse me," I called out to the workers. "You are on private property without permission. May I ask what you are doing?" The oldest of the 3 men, clearly the supervisor, turned with a confused expression. "We have an authorization to remove an abandoned trailer." He gestured toward Karen. "The lady said it was approved by the homeowner." "I am the homeowner," I stated clearly, "and I have given no such authorization." Karen stepped forward, voice raised. "The HOA has authorization under covenant violations. You have ignored multiple notices and refused to pay the accruing fines." I addressed the workers directly. "This is private property. You are currently trespassing. If you proceed without my consent or a court order, I will be forced to contact law enforcement." The workers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Their supervisor pulled out his work order and studied it more carefully. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "this authorization is from the HOA, not the property owner or county sheriff. We cannot legally remove anything without proper authority." Karen's face contorted with fury. "I am the authority in this neighborhood. The covenant gives us enforcement powers." "Not without due process," I interjected calmly. "Covenant enforcement requires proper notification, hearing opportunities, and if necessary, a court order. You have provided none of these." The workers began packing up their equipment, muttering apologies. Karen pulled out her phone. "I am calling the police," she threatened. "You are interfering with HOA business." "Please do," I replied, continuing to record. "I would appreciate having them document this attempted unauthorized removal of my property." She stared at me for a long moment before lowering her phone. "This is not over," she repeated her mantra, voice quivering with rage. "The board meeting tomorrow night will address your continued defiance." That evening, I reported the incident to Agent Davidson. His concern was evident. "We are approaching a critical surveillance window," he explained. "Any disruption now could compromise months of work. Keep documentation of everything, but maintain your cover at all costs." The HOA meeting the following evening was a spectacle of suburban governance at its worst. 37 residents crowded into the community center as Karen dramatically recounted her version of events, painting me as a belligerent rule breaker threatening neighborhood stability. I sat quietly in the back row, nodding which neighbors nodded in agreement and which seemed skeptical. When public comments opened, I approached the microphone calmly. "Good evening," I began. "I understand concerns about property aesthetics. However, I am troubled by repeated trespassing on my land, attempts to remove my property without legal authority, and the personal nature this enforcement has taken. The HOA exists to maintain community standards through proper procedures, not vigilante actions. A murmur rippled through the audience. Several heads nodded. Karen quickly cut off the comment period. The escalation continued 3 nights later. My motion-activated cameras captured Karen's silhouette approaching the trailer at 11:42 p.m. This time, she came prepared with a flashlight. She moved cautiously along the trailer's perimeter, shining light through each window, attempting to peek through the specialized film. When she reached the rear door, she tested the handle, finding it locked. Then, in a moment of brazen determination, she removed something from her pocket, a credit card or similar tool, and attempted to force the lock. The angle prevented success, and after several frustrated attempts, she retreated back across my property line. The following morning, I found a police car parked in front of my house. An officer approached as I stepped outside. "Good morning, sir," he said professionally. "We received a complaint about suspicious activity at this residence. A neighbor reported seeing equipment consistent with illegal surveillance or manufacturing." I maintained my composure. "That is interesting, officer. I believe my neighbor may have trespassed on my property last night. I have security footage I would be happy to share." The officer's expression shifted subtly. "Would you mind if I took a look at that footage?" Inside, I played the recording of Karen's nighttime expedition. The officer watched intently, taking notes. "Sir," he said finally, "it appears your neighbor made an unfounded report after trespassing on your property. Would you like to file charges?" "Not at this time," I replied, "but I would appreciate if this incident were documented. The situation has been escalating." The officer nodded. "I will file a report about the trespassing attempt. If there are further incidents, please contact us immediately." As the police car pulled away, I noticed Karen watching from across the street, her expression a mixture of shock and outrage. Her attempt to weaponize law enforcement had backfired spectacularly. But rather than causing her to retreat, I feared it would only intensify her obsession. The trailer had become more than a simple covenant violation to her now. It was a mystery she was determined to solve, regardless of legal boundaries. And with each passing day, the DEA operation continued gathering critical intelligence, unaware that its greatest threat came not from drug cartels, but from a clipboard-wielding neighbor with an inflated sense of authority. The emergency HOA meeting was announced via neon orange flyers taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. "Urgent community safety concern" blazed across the top in bold capital letters. The meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. on Thursday in the community center. Attendance strongly encouraged for all homeowners concerned about neighborhood security. Word spread quickly throughout Oak Ridge Estates. Neighbors who had previously maintained polite neutrality now avoided eye contact when I collected my mail. Parents would subtly redirect their children away when I walked past. The whispers had evolved into open speculation. By 6:45 p.m., the community center parking lot overflowed with vehicles. Residents stood in clusters, conversations halting abruptly when I approached. Inside, folding chairs had been arranged in rows facing a makeshift podium adorned with the HOA logo. Karen stood at the front, speaking intensely with Richard and 3 other board members. As the room filled to capacity, Karen stepped onto a folding chair to address the crowd, commanding attention with raised hands. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying a practiced gravity. "It is rare that we face issues requiring emergency action, but recent events demand immediate community response." She gestured toward a poster board propped on an easel, a blown-up photograph of my trailer taken with a telephoto lens. Next to it, a printed enlargement of county property lines with my parcel highlighted in angry red marker. "For over 2 months, we have attempted to address a serious covenant violation through standard procedures," she continued. "That approach has failed. The situation has evolved beyond aesthetics into legitimate security concerns." A murmur rippled through the audience as Karen dramatically produced a folder. Multiple neighbors have reported unusual activities: late-night visitors, electronic equipment being transported, refusal to allow routine inspections of the property. Each accusation landed like a gavel strike. When questioned, the homeowner becomes confrontational and evasive. From my seat in the back row, I watched residents exchange worried glances. Karen was skillfully transforming me from rule breaker to neighborhood menace, a strategy that shifted the conflict from HOA regulations to community fear. "We believe," Karen said, lowering her voice for effect, "that what lurks in that trailer may pose genuine dangers to our families. Today we vote on emergency measures to protect our community." Richard stepped forward with printouts, distributing them to each row. "The board proposes invoking Section 93 of our covenant, emergency enforcement powers. This would authorize immediate legal action against continuing violations deemed hazardous to community welfare." I remained silent, documenting every word, every accusation. The vote was performative, a show of strength rather than democratic process. Hands raised overwhelmingly in favor of emergency action, with only 3 abstentions in a room of over 50 residents. As the meeting concluded, I quietly exited, avoiding the clusters of neighbors now openly staring. In my driveway, I discovered the first act of vandalism, a crude word scratched into my garage door paint. By morning, someone had spray-painted "GOA" across my mailbox and slashed my garden hose. I photographed each incident methodically, adding the images to my growing documentation file. The police officer who responded seemed unsurprised. "Neighborhood disputes can get ugly," he observed, writing up his report. "Anything specific triggering this escalation?" I explained the HOA conflict in measured terms, omitting any mention of the trailer's true purpose. The officer recommended installing additional security cameras and filing for a restraining order if threats continued. That evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, my secure phone buzzed with an urgent message from Agent Davidson. "Activity detected. Surveillance critical next 72 hours. Maintain position at all costs." I checked the trailer's monitoring systems remotely. The sophisticated equipment had picked up communications indicating cartel movement nearby, precisely the intelligence the operation had been established to gather. After months of waiting, the surveillance was finally yielding results. At 2:13 a.m., my security system alerted me to movement near my property line. The night vision cameras revealed 3 figures approaching the tree line, Karen and 2 male board members I recognized from meetings. They carried flashlights, moving with exaggerated stealth toward the trailer. I watched as they photographed the structure from multiple angles, tested windows, and examined the door locks. Karen pointed repeatedly toward the roof where a small, disguised antenna was barely visible. After 27 minutes of trespassing, they retreated toward the street. By morning, an official-looking document was taped to my front door. Notice of legal action in imposing legal typography. The HOA had filed for an injunction in county court, seeking forced removal of the hazardous structure and punitive damages for willful community endangerment. I forwarded images of the legal notice to Agent Davidson, who responded immediately. "Maintain position. Legal team engaging. Critical surveillance window active." That afternoon, a news van parked at the entrance to our subdivision. Karen had escalated to local media, positioning herself as a concerned citizen fighting for neighborhood safety. The evening news featured a 30-second segment showing exterior shots of Oak Ridge Estates, Karen speaking earnestly about suspicious activities, and a distant zoom shot of my property line with the trailer barely visible through trees. My phone began ringing with calls from concerned friends who had seen the broadcast. Neighbors who had previously been friendly now crossed the street to avoid passing my house. The isolation was by design. Karen was creating a community united against a common threat. I maintained my routine, documenting each new development with clinical precision. My binder now contained over 70 pages of evidence: trespassing incidents, false reports, harassment, property damage, and defamation. Every accusation, every legal threat, every violation of my rights, all meticulously recorded. Meanwhile, the trailer continued its silent work. The surveillance equipment captured critical intelligence as cartel operatives moved product through seemingly legitimate businesses in the area. The operation that had justified months of patience was finally bearing fruit. I received instructions to maintain the surveillance post at all costs for 72 more hours. The neighborhood campaign against me was reaching fever pitch, but the bigger picture remained invisible to everyone except me and a handful of federal agents. Corinne's obsession had unwittingly placed her on a collision course with forces far beyond her comprehension. The 72-hour critical surveillance window stretched into 5 days of intensive monitoring. The trailer's sophisticated equipment tracked movements, recorded conversations, and documented transactions that would form the backbone of a major federal case. I maintained daily reports to Agent Davidson, who confirmed the operation was approaching conclusion. On the 6th day, I received word that I needed to leave the house for exactly 2 hours, a strategic window that would allow technical agents to retrieve certain data without detection. The neighborhood watch Corinne had organized made normal comings and goings suspicious, but I had no choice. I departed at precisely 3:15 p.m., driving to a shopping center 30 minutes away where I would wait until the prescribed return time. Security cameras monitored my property from multiple angles, transmitting feeds directly to my secure phone. For the first hour, nothing unusual occurred beyond the now routine drive-by from HOA board members documenting my continuing violation. At 4:23 p.m., an alert flashed on my screen. Motion detected at the property line. I watched with growing alarm as Corinne approached the trailer, not with her usual cautious surveillance posture, but with determined purpose. She carried a small bag and moved directly to the door, looking around nervously before retrieving something from her pocket. The camera angle shifted as she manipulated the lock, revealing what appeared to be crude lockpicking tools. After several minutes of frustrated attempts, the door yielded. Corinne slipped inside the trailer, closing the door behind her. I immediately contacted Agent Davidson. Emergency situation. Unauthorized entry to surveillance post in progress. His response was immediate. En route, ETA 18 minutes. Do not engage until backup arrives. But as I watched the interior feed, my heart raced. Corinne was moving through the trailer, examining equipment, opening cabinets, photographing documents clearly marked confidential. She touched keyboards, inspected monitors displaying tracking data, and rifled through operational files. Each action potentially compromised months of carefully gathered intelligence and possibly the safety of undercover agents. I could not wait 18 minutes. I started my car and sped back toward the neighborhood, maintaining constant observation through the security feeds. Corinne was becoming more brazen, removing documents from folders, photographing maps with surveillance locations marked. She picked up a secure radio, examining the encryption module with obvious confusion. As I turned onto my street, I noticed the first unmarked vehicle already positioned at the corner. Agent Davidson had mobilized resources faster than expected. I pulled into my driveway at the same moment Corinne emerged from the trailer, clutching her phone and what appeared to be several pages of documents. Our eyes met across the yard. Her expression shifted from determination to shock, then fear as she realized she had been caught in the act. Rather than attempt escape, she squared her shoulders and marched directly toward me, summoning her practiced authority. "I have evidence now," she announced, voice quavering slightly despite her attempt at confidence. "This is not just a covenant violation. You have illegal surveillance equipment, maps of the neighborhood radio transmitters." "Corinne," I interrupted calmly, activating my phone's recording function. "You have just broken into private property. You are currently in possession of confidential federal documents." Her expression faltered. "Federal, what are you talking about?" The sound of vehicles approaching drew her attention to the street, where 3 unmarked SUVs now parked in sequence. Men and women in plain clothes emerged, moving with the unmistakable purpose of law enforcement. "What is happening?" Karen demanded, her voice rising in panic. "What have you done?" "I have not done anything," I replied evenly. "But you have just compromised a Drug Enforcement Administration surveillance operation." The color drained from her face as Agent Davidson approached, displaying his credentials. "Ma'am, I need you to place those documents on the ground and step away." "This is a mistake," Karen stammered, clutching the papers tighter. "He has illegal equipment. He has been violating HOA regulations. I was performing an inspection." "By breaking and entering?" Agent Davidson asked. "Were you authorized to enter that structure?" "The HOA has inspection rights," she insisted, her practiced certainty crumbling. "We have rules about structures like this." "Ma'am," another agent interrupted, "that trailer is a federal surveillance post. Those documents you removed are classified. The equipment you tampered with is government property." The reality of her situation finally registered in her expression. Karen looked from the agents to me, then to the papers in her hand, as if seeing them for the first time. She slowly placed them on the ground, her hands visibly trembling. "I did not know," she whispered. "How was I supposed to know?" "You were not supposed to know," Agent Davidson stated firmly. "That was the point, and you were certainly not authorized to break in, regardless of what you suspected." As agents led Karen toward one of the vehicles, neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the unusual activity. Richard Thompson approached cautiously, clipboard still in hand, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he registered the federal agents securing the scene. "What is happening?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Agent Davidson turned to address the growing crowd. "This is a federal matter now. I suggest everyone return to their homes. A statement will be provided through proper channels when appropriate." As Karen was placed in the backseat of an SUV, our eyes met one final time. The neighborhood authority, the suburban enforcer, had been reduced to a pale, frightened woman who had drastically overstepped her jurisdiction. In her quest to enforce arbitrary rules about property aesthetics, she had interfered with a federal investigation tracking dangerous criminal organizations. The trailer that had offended her sensibilities for months had been protecting her community in ways she could never have imagined. And now her crusade had become her downfall. The following day, the story broke across local media. HOA president arrested for interfering with federal investigation dominated headlines. Television crews positioned themselves at the entrance to Oak Ridge Estates, capturing footage of unmarked federal vehicles coming and going from my property. Karen spent 27 hours in federal custody before being released on strict conditions. The charges were serious: obstruction of justice, tampering with federal evidence, unauthorized access to classified information. Her attorney's statement claimed ignorance and overzealous community protection as mitigating factors. At 10:00 a.m., 2 days after the arrest, Agent Davidson conducted a brief press conference at the county courthouse steps. He provided minimal operational details while emphasizing the severity of the interference. The individual in question compromised a long-standing surveillance operation targeting narcotics trafficking in the region, he stated to assembled reporters. While this interference occurred during the final phase of intelligence gathering, it potentially jeopardized months of investigative work and the safety of federal personnel. When questioned about my role, Agent Davidson offered a measured response. The property owner was cooperating with federal authorities, providing access to a strategic location necessary for surveillance operations. Any neighborhood disputes regarding property aesthetics were entirely separate from and irrelevant to the federal investigation. The media quickly constructed a compelling narrative: overzealous HOA president versus undercover federal operation. Karen's documented history of aggressive enforcement provided journalists with a ready-made character arc. Her previous conflicts with other homeowners suddenly became relevant, with former residents coming forward with stories of excessive fines and harassment. By afternoon, the HOA board released a terse statement. The board of directors was unaware of any federal operations within our community, and did not authorize any actions that would interfere with law enforcement activities. The board is cooperating fully with authorities and will be conducting an internal review of all enforcement procedures. The trailer, no longer needed for surveillance, was quietly removed 3 days later. The DEA operation had gathered sufficient intelligence before Karen's interference, resulting in 17 arrests across 3 counties and the seizure of substantial quantities of narcotics and firearms. As media interest intensified, neighbors who had previously avoided me began approaching with hesitant apologies. Mrs. Jameson from 2 doors down brought a homemade apple pie. "We should have asked questions instead of jumping to conclusions," she admitted, eyes downcast. Mr. Garvey, who had vocally supported Karen at HOA meetings, stopped me while I was retrieving my mail. "I feel terrible about what happened to your property," he said, referencing the vandalism. "Some of us got caught up in the hysteria. That was wrong." The community center hosted an emergency meeting, this time organized by concerned residents rather than HOA leadership. Over 70 homeowners attended, many standing against walls when seating ran out. The mood was subdued, contemplative rather than confrontational. Richard Thompson, visibly uncomfortable in his temporary role as acting HOA president, opened with a formal apology. "Recent events have revealed serious flaws in our governance approach," he acknowledged. "We lost perspective on what matters in a community: safety, respect, and proper procedure." When invited to speak, I approached the podium calmly. The room fell silent. "I moved to Oak Ridge Estates because it seemed like a safe, peaceful neighborhood," I began. "That impression was accurate, more than any of you realized. This community was never in danger from my trailer. In fact, that trailer was part of keeping this neighborhood safe from very real threats." I paused, looking across the faces of neighbors who had been manipulated into fear and hostility. "I cannot discuss operational details, but I can say this: appearances can be deceiving. What looks abandoned might serve a purpose. What seems like defiance might be necessary compliance with higher authorities. And sometimes, the greatest threats come not from outside our community, but from allowing power to corrupt our judgment." The vote to restructure the HOA governance was nearly unanimous. The Byzantine Covenant would be reviewed and simplified. Enforcement procedures would require multiple board members and proper documentation. Most significantly, an ethics committee consisting of non-board residents would provide oversight for all major decisions. Karen's absence transformed the community. The cloud of constant surveillance lifted. Neighbors began speaking to each other more freely, without fear of being reported for minor infractions. Children played outside later into evening. Gardens became more diverse, more personal, less constrained by unwritten aesthetic standards. 1 week after the arrest, I received a hand-delivered letter. Karen's attorney had advised against direct contact, but she had apparently insisted. The note was brief, written in a shaky hand, unlike her normally precise penmanship. "I believed I was protecting our community," she wrote. "I never imagined the trailer was actually doing that job better than I ever could. My house goes on the market next week. I cannot stay where my reputation is destroyed. I hope someday to understand how I became the very threat I thought I was fighting." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my documentation binder, the final entry in a chronicle of HOA overreach that had culminated in federal charges. Karen's crusade had been built on appearances, on surface-level judgments that missed the deeper reality. In her zealous enforcement of aesthetic standards, she had become blind to the substance beneath. The transition happened gradually, then suddenly, the way most social changes occur. Within 3 weeks of Karen's arrest, the Oak Ridge Estates HOA had been fundamentally transformed. The Emergency Reform Committee reduced the covenant from 172 pages to 27. Aesthetic regulations were simplified to focus on safety and basic maintenance rather than rigid conformity. Karen's house stood empty for 17 days before a moving truck arrived. She conducted the sale through her attorney, never returning to the property herself. The young couple who purchased the colonial-style home had no idea of its previous owner's notoriety, having moved from out of state. Neighbors welcomed them warmly, no clipboards in sight. With the surveillance operation concluded, I had fulfilled my obligation to the DEA. Agent Davidson visited one final time to retrieve the last of the equipment and documentation. Not every civilian cooperator handles that kind of pressure so well, he noted as we stood in my kitchen. Most would have cracked under the neighborhood campaign against you. I understood the importance of the operation, I replied. Sometimes being misunderstood is part of doing what is right. He smiled slightly. We have another location we might need in about 6 months. Different neighborhood, similar setup. Would you be interested? I considered the offer. Let me get through the neighborhood recovery process here first, but yes, I would consider it. After Davidson departed, I walked to the bare patch where the trailer had stood. Already, grass was beginning to reclaim the compressed earth. To any observer, it would soon show no sign of the drama that had unfolded there. I decided to transform the space, not to hide its history, but to commemorate it in my own way.